Question 1. When evaluating the financial reporting processes at Nucor, which approach best ensures compliance with U.S. federal securities laws and internal ethical guidelines for financial integrity? Option A. A comprehensive review of all financial statements, supporting documentation, and internal control procedures, with independent verification of key data points and seeking clarification on any ambiguities. Option B. Focusing primarily on the overall positive trends in Nucor's performance, with a cursory glance at the financial statements to confirm general alignment. Option C. Accepting the financial reports as presented by the accounting department, assuming their accuracy unless significant, obvious errors are immediately apparent. Option D. Relying on informal discussions with senior management to confirm the validity of financial figures, without detailed examination of underlying records. The correct answer is A. A comprehensive review of all financial statements, supporting documentation, and internal control procedures, with independent verification of key data points and seeking clarification on any ambiguities. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Nucor, as a publicly traded company, is subject to stringent regulatory oversight concerning its financial reporting and internal controls. Ensuring compliance with these regulations is paramount to maintaining investor confidence, avoiding legal penalties, and upholding the company's reputation. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the need for accurate and timely financial information with the ethical imperative to prevent misrepresentation or omission of material facts. Careful judgment is required to identify and address potential discrepancies or misleading information before it impacts stakeholders. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective review of all relevant financial data and documentation, cross-referencing information from different sources, and seeking clarification from appropriate personnel within Nucor when ambiguities arise. This methodical process ensures that any financial reporting is not only compliant with applicable regulations, but also accurately reflects the company's financial position. This aligns with the principles of professional integrity and due diligence expected of individuals involved in financial oversight, and specifically with the requirements of regulations such as the Sarbanes-Oxley Act (SOX) in the United States, which mandates accurate financial reporting and robust internal controls for public companies. An incorrect approach that relies solely on anecdotal evidence or the assurances of a single individual without independent verification would be professionally unacceptable. This failure would violate the ethical duty to ensure accuracy and could lead to material misstatements in financial reports, potentially breaching SOX requirements for internal controls and accurate disclosure. Another incorrect approach, which involves overlooking minor discrepancies with the assumption that they are insignificant, is also professionally flawed. Even seemingly small inaccuracies can, in aggregate, become material and mislead investors, thus failing to meet the standards of accuracy and completeness required by financial regulations. Furthermore, an approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy by rushing the review process without adequate diligence risks missing critical issues and would be a dereliction of professional responsibility, potentially violating the spirit and letter of financial compliance laws. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific regulatory landscape applicable to Nucor. This involves identifying all relevant laws, rules, and guidelines. Next, they should gather all necessary information and documentation, critically evaluating its completeness and accuracy. When uncertainties or potential issues are identified, the framework dictates seeking clarification through established channels and, if necessary, escalating concerns to appropriate oversight bodies or legal counsel. The process should always prioritize accuracy, integrity, and compliance, ensuring that all actions are defensible under the relevant regulatory framework. Question 2. The evaluation methodology shows that a production supervisor at Nucor has received a credible report from an employee regarding a potential safety hazard on the plant floor. The supervisor is under pressure to meet a critical production deadline. Which of the following actions best reflects Nucor's commitment to ethical and regulatory compliance in this situation? Option A. Delay the investigation until after the production deadline is met, prioritizing the immediate business objective over the reported safety concern. Option B. Proceed with increasing production to meet the deadline, assuming the report is a minor issue that can be addressed after the critical period has passed. Option C. Dismiss the report as a minor inconvenience and instruct the employee to continue working, assuring them it will be looked into at a later, unspecified time. Option D. Immediately initiate a thorough, objective investigation into the reported safety hazard, potentially pausing production if deemed necessary for employee safety, and documenting all findings and actions. The correct answer is D. Immediately initiate a thorough, objective investigation into the reported safety hazard, potentially pausing production if deemed necessary for employee safety, and documenting all findings and actions. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance the immediate needs of a business unit with the overarching ethical and regulatory obligations of Nucor. Pressure to meet production targets can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential compliance issues. Careful judgment is required to ensure that short-term gains do not compromise long-term integrity and legal standing. The correct approach involves prioritizing a thorough, objective investigation into the reported safety concern before any production adjustments are made. This aligns with Nucor's commitment to a safe working environment, which is a fundamental ethical responsibility and often a regulatory requirement under workplace safety laws. By initiating an immediate, unbiased review, Nucor demonstrates its adherence to its own internal policies and any applicable regulations designed to protect employee well-being. This proactive stance prevents potential harm, avoids regulatory penalties, and upholds the company's reputation. An incorrect approach that involves immediately increasing production without investigating the safety concern fails to acknowledge the seriousness of the report and the potential for harm. This bypasses established safety protocol and could lead to a violation of workplace safety regulations, exposing Nucor to fines, legal action, and reputational damage. It also signals a disregard for employee safety, which is ethically unacceptable. Another incorrect approach, which is to dismiss the report as a minor issue without proper verification, is equally problematic. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to take employee concerns seriously. Such an action could result in a serious accident if the reported issue is indeed significant, leading to severe consequences for both employees and the company, and a clear breach of ethical and regulatory duties. Finally, an approach that involves delaying the investigation to prioritize production targets is a direct conflict between operational demands and ethical/regulatory responsibilities. While production is vital, it cannot come at the expense of safety and compliance. This delay could exacerbate the problem, leading to more severe outcomes and demonstrating a failure to uphold Nucor's core values and legal obligations. The professional decision-making process in similar situations should involve a clear hierarchy of priorities: safety and compliance first, followed by operational efficiency. When a potential safety or regulatory issue is raised, the immediate steps should be to pause non-essential operations if necessary, gather information objectively, conduct a thorough investigation, and implement corrective actions based on findings, all while keeping relevant stakeholders informed. Question 3. Analysis of a scenario where a Nucor employee discovers that a potential vendor for a significant project is owned by a close personal friend. The employee is involved in the vendor selection process. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Nucor employee to ensure ethical conduct and compliance with company guidelines? Option A. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to Nucor management and the compliance department and recuse themselves from any part of the vendor selection process involving this specific vendor. Option B. Avoid any mention of the personal relationship to Nucor and focus solely on the technical merits of the vendor's proposal, believing that the best proposal should win regardless of personal connections. Option C. Proceed with evaluating the vendor as usual, assuming their personal friendship will not influence their professional judgment, and only disclose if specifically asked. Option D. Discreetly inform the friend about Nucor's evaluation criteria to help them tailor their proposal, while still maintaining a professional demeanor during the selection process. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to Nucor management and the compliance department, and recuse themselves from any part of the vendor selection process involving this specific vendor. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at Nucor to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure compliance with internal policies and ethical standards, which are paramount in maintaining trust and integrity within the organization and with its stakeholders. The core of the challenge lies in identifying and appropriately managing situations where personal interests could improperly influence professional judgment or actions. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between acceptable and unacceptable conduct, ensuring that Nucor's business operations are conducted with the highest ethical standards. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent disclosure of the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate Nucor management or compliance department. This demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and allows Nucor to implement measures to mitigate any risks. Specifically, this approach aligns with general principles of corporate governance and ethical business practices, which often mandate disclosure of potential conflicts to ensure objectivity and prevent impropriety. While specific Nucor policies would govern the exact procedure, the underlying principle of transparency and seeking guidance is universally recognized as best professional practice. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the business relationship without disclosing the potential conflict. This failure to disclose is a direct violation of ethical principles and likely contravenes Nucor's internal code of conduct or conflict of interest policy. Such a failure can lead to accusations of favoritism, unfair dealing, and a breach of fiduciary duty, undermining the integrity of Nucor's decision-making processes. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to conceal the relationship or downplay its significance. This is ethically reprehensible and constitutes a deliberate attempt to mislead the company. It not only violates ethical standards, but also exposes Nucor to significant reputational and legal risks if discovered. A third incorrect approach would be to assume that the relationship is not a conflict of interest without seeking clarification. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and an insufficient understanding of ethical obligations. Professional responsibility requires individuals to err on the side of caution and seek guidance when in doubt, rather than making unilateral judgments that could have negative consequences. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of Nucor's ethical guidelines and conflict of interest policies. When faced with a situation that could potentially create a conflict, the individual should first identify the nature of the relationship and the potential for influence. Second, they should consult Nucor's relevant policies and procedures. Third, if there is any doubt or if the situation appears to fall within the scope of a potential conflict, they must proactively disclose the situation to their supervisor or the designated compliance officer. This ensures that Nucor can review the situation and provide clear direction on how to proceed, thereby safeguarding the company's interests and upholding ethical standards. Question 4. The efficiency study reveals potential discrepancies in inventory valuation methods used across different Nucor facilities. These discrepancies, while not immediately appearing material in isolation, could collectively impact the overall reported inventory value. What is the most appropriate initial step for Nucor's finance department to take in addressing these findings? Option A. Initiate a detailed internal investigation to understand the nature, cause, and potential financial impact of the discrepancies, documenting all findings and proposed corrective actions. Option B. Immediately adjust the financial statements to reflect a conservative inventory valuation across all facilities to mitigate potential risks. Option C. Disclose the potential inventory valuation discrepancies to external auditors and investors immediately, pending further internal review. Option D. Classify the discrepancies as immaterial and proceed with the current reporting methods, focusing on other operational efficiencies. The correct answer is B. Immediately adjust the financial statements to reflect a conservative inventory valuation across all facilities to mitigate potential risks. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Nucor, as a publicly traded company, is subject to stringent regulations regarding financial reporting and internal controls. The efficiency study's findings, if not handled appropriately, could indicate potential misstatements or control deficiencies that require careful consideration and adherence to established accounting principles and regulatory guidance. The need for accurate financial reporting and investor confidence necessitates a structured and compliant approach to addressing such findings. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation and documentation process, aligning with the principles of Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, GAAP, and the Sarbanes-Oxley Act SOX of 2002, particularly Section 404, concerning internal control over financial reporting. This approach ensures that any identified issues are properly assessed for their impact on financial statements and that appropriate remediation plans are developed and implemented. This aligns with the ethical obligation to maintain accurate financial records and uphold transparency with stakeholders. An incorrect approach that involves immediately adjusting financial statements without a proper investigation fails to adhere to the due process required by GAAP, risks overstating or understating financial positions, and could lead to inaccurate reporting. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the findings due to their perceived minor nature, violates the principle of internal control and the SOX requirement to identify and address all material weaknesses. This can lead to a breakdown in financial reporting integrity over time. Finally, an approach that involves disclosing the findings to external parties before internal assessment and remediation is complete could prematurely damage investor confidence and violate confidentiality obligations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the nature and impact of the findings, consulting relevant accounting standards and regulations, involving appropriate internal stakeholders, e.g., internal audit, finance, legal, and developing a documented plan for investigation and remediation. This structured process ensures compliance, accuracy, and the maintenance of ethical standards. Question 5. Stakeholder feedback indicates potential discrepancies in the reporting of production output at one of Nucor's facilities, raising concerns about the accuracy of inventory management and potentially impacting financial disclosures. Which of the following represents the most appropriate initial course of action for Nucor's management? Option A. Advise the involved employees to adjust their reporting methods to align with management's expectations without a formal inquiry. Option B. Publicly announce a review of the reporting procedures at the facility to assure stakeholders of Nucor's commitment to transparency. Option C. Immediately implement stricter production quotas and disciplinary measures for the relevant personnel to ensure future accuracy. Option D. Initiate a thorough, documented internal investigation involving the legal and compliance departments to gather objective evidence regarding the reported discrepancies before taking any further action. The correct answer is D. Initiate a thorough, documented internal investigation involving the legal and compliance departments to gather objective evidence regarding the reported discrepancies before taking any further action. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate operational needs with its long-term commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. Nucor, as a publicly traded company, is subject to various regulations designed to ensure fair and transparent business practices. The challenge lies in identifying and acting upon information that could indicate a breach of these standards without causing undue disruption or making unsubstantiated accusations. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between potential issues and confirmed violations, and to ensure that any investigation or action taken is both proportionate and legally sound. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process of investigation, adhering strictly to Nucor's internal policies and relevant U.S. federal and state regulations governing corporate conduct and reporting. This approach prioritizes gathering objective evidence, consulting with legal and compliance departments, and ensuring that any actions taken are based on a thorough understanding of the facts and legal requirements. This aligns with best practices for corporate governance and ethical decision-making, which emphasize due diligence, transparency, where appropriate, and accountability. Specifically, it reflects the principles embedded in regulations like the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, SOX, which mandates robust internal controls and accurate financial reporting, and the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, which governs disclosures and prohibits fraudulent activities. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the feedback without proper investigation, potentially overlooking a significant compliance issue and exposing Nucor to legal penalties and reputational damage. This failure to act on credible stakeholder concerns violates the spirit of corporate responsibility and may contravene specific regulatory requirements for internal reporting and oversight. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately implement punitive measures or publicize the allegations without a thorough, impartial investigation. This could lead to wrongful accusations, legal liabilities for defamation or wrongful termination, and damage to employee morale, all of which are contrary to ethical business practices and regulatory expectations for fair treatment and due process. Furthermore, acting solely on anecdotal evidence, without seeking corroboration or expert advice from legal or compliance teams, represents a failure in due diligence and a disregard for established corporate governance protocols. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with acknowledging and documenting all stakeholder feedback. This should be followed by an initial assessment to determine the credibility and potential severity of the concerns. If the feedback suggests a potential violation of regulations or company policy, the next step is to engage the appropriate internal resources, such as the legal department, compliance officers, or internal audit, to initiate a formal investigation. This investigation must be conducted impartially, with a focus on collecting factual evidence and adhering to established procedures. Throughout this process, maintaining confidentiality and ensuring that all actions are legally defensible and ethically sound are paramount. Question 6. Research into Nucor's steel production process has identified potential areas for significant efficiency improvements. A project team is tasked with recommending and implementing changes to optimize output. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Nucor's commitment to operational excellence and regulatory compliance? Option A. Focusing on achieving a predetermined target percentage increase in output by adjusting production schedules without a detailed understanding of the underlying process inefficiencies. Option B. Expediting the implementation of proposed changes by temporarily suspending certain quality control checks to accelerate the production timeline and demonstrate immediate gains. Option C. Conducting a thorough, data-driven analysis of current workflows, identifying specific bottlenecks through objective metrics, and proposing verifiable improvements that adhere to all financial reporting standards. Option D. Implementing process changes based on preliminary observations and anecdotal feedback from floor supervisors to quickly achieve reported output increases. The correct answer is D. Implementing process changes based on preliminary observations and anecdotal feedback from floor supervisors to quickly achieve reported output increases. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Nucor, as a publicly traded company, operates under stringent regulatory oversight, particularly concerning financial reporting and operational transparency. The pressure to demonstrate efficiency gains can lead to temptations to misrepresent data or adopt shortcuts that violate established accounting principles or internal controls. Careful judgment is required to balance the drive for improvement with the absolute necessity of ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. The correct approach involves a systematic and data-driven evaluation of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies through objective observation and analysis, and then proposing improvements that are verifiable and align with Nucor's established operational and financial reporting standards. This approach is right because it upholds the principles of accuracy, integrity, and accountability mandated by financial regulations and ethical business practices. It ensures that any reported process optimization results are based on factual data and do not involve manipulation or misrepresentation, thereby maintaining Nucor's credibility with stakeholders and regulatory bodies. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on achieving a target metric without rigorous data validation is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to the inflation of efficiency gains, which constitutes financial misrepresentation and violates accounting standards. Another incorrect approach that involves bypassing established internal control procedures to expedite implementation, even with good intentions, creates significant risks of errors, fraud, and noncompliance with regulatory requirements. Furthermore, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or subjective assessments rather than objective data undermines the credibility of the findings and can lead to flawed decision-making, potentially resulting in wasted resources or even regulatory scrutiny. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance above all else. This involves understanding the relevant legal and regulatory landscape, adhering to internal policies and procedures, and maintaining a commitment to data integrity. When faced with pressure to achieve results, professionals must critically assess the methods proposed, ensuring they are both effective and compliant. If any proposed method raises ethical or regulatory concerns, it should be immediately flagged and addressed through appropriate channels, seeking guidance from legal or compliance departments if necessary. Question 7. Compliance review shows that Nucor is in the preliminary stages of evaluating a potential acquisition that, if successful, could significantly impact its market position. However, definitive terms have not yet been agreed upon, and the outcome remains uncertain. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for Nucor's management regarding public disclosure? Option A. Wait for the acquisition to be fully finalized and all agreements signed before making any public announcement. Option B. Conduct a thorough internal review with legal and compliance teams to assess the materiality of the potential acquisition and determine the appropriate disclosure timing and content, while refraining from any public comment until a decision is made. Option C. Immediately issue a press release detailing the ongoing acquisition discussions, including potential targets and valuation ranges, to keep investors fully informed. Option D. Issue a press release acknowledging that Nucor is exploring strategic opportunities, without providing specific details about the potential acquisition. The correct answer is D. Issue a press release acknowledging that Nucor is exploring strategic opportunities, without providing specific details about the potential acquisition. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Nucor, as a publicly traded company, operates under stringent regulatory oversight, particularly concerning financial reporting and internal controls. The challenge lies in balancing the need for timely and accurate information dissemination with the imperative to avoid premature or misleading disclosures that could impact market perception and investor confidence. Careful judgment is required to determine when and how to communicate significant developments. The correct approach involves a thorough internal assessment and consultation with legal and compliance teams before any public statement is made. This ensures that Nucor adheres to its disclosure obligations under relevant securities laws and exchange listing rules. By gathering all necessary facts and understanding the potential implications, the company can formulate a communication strategy that is both compliant and responsible, preventing market manipulation or insider trading concerns. This aligns with the principles of fair disclosure and investor protection mandated by regulatory bodies. An incorrect approach of immediately issuing a press release without internal verification risks disseminating incomplete or inaccurate information. This could lead to regulatory scrutiny, shareholder lawsuits, and damage to Nucor's reputation. Another incorrect approach, that of waiting for definitive external confirmation that may take an extended period, could violate the duty to inform the market of material events in a timely manner, potentially creating an unfair information asymmetry. Finally, relying solely on informal internal discussions without formal documentation or legal review bypasses critical compliance checkpoints, increasing the risk of regulatory noncompliance and potential legal liabilities. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that prioritizes fact-finding, risk assessment, and consultation with subject matter experts, legal, compliance, investor relations, when faced with potential material events. This framework should include established protocols for evaluating the materiality of information, determining the appropriate disclosure channels, and ensuring the accuracy and completeness of all public communications. Question 8. Comparative studies suggest that proactive identification and reporting of operational anomalies are crucial for maintaining workplace safety and regulatory compliance. At a Nucor facility, an employee observes a minor, intermittent leak from a piece of equipment that is not currently impacting production, but appears to be a deviation from standard operating procedures. The employee is aware of the pressure to meet production targets for the current shift. What is the most appropriate course of action for the employee? Option A. Attempt to temporarily seal the leak using available materials without informing anyone to prevent a production stoppage. Option B. Assume the leak is minor and will resolve itself, continuing with their assigned tasks to avoid delaying production. Option C. Immediately report the observed leak to their direct supervisor and the designated safety personnel, following Nucor's established reporting procedures. Option D. Discuss the leak with fellow employees to gauge their opinion on its severity before deciding whether to report it. Correct answer is C. Immediately report the observed leak to their direct supervisor and the designated safety personnel, following Nucor's established reporting procedures. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Nucor employee due to the inherent conflict between achieving business objectives and adhering to ethical and regulatory standards. The pressure to meet production targets can sometimes lead individuals to overlook or rationalize minor deviations from established procedures, which, if unchecked, can escalate into more significant compliance issues. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for efficiency with the imperative of integrity. The correct approach involves prioritizing adherence to Nucor's established safety protocols and reporting procedures, even when faced with perceived minor deviations or time constraints. This aligns with Nucor's commitment to a safe working environment and its regulatory obligations. By immediately reporting the observed issue, the employee upholds the company's safety culture and ensures that potential hazards are addressed promptly, preventing any compromise to operational integrity or potential regulatory violations. This proactive stance is ethically sound and professionally responsible. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the observed issue, assuming it is minor and will resolve itself. This failure to report a potential safety concern directly contravenes Nucor's safety policies and could lead to regulatory noncompliance if the issue escalates and causes an incident. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to fix the issue without following proper reporting and authorization procedures. This bypasses established safety checks and balances, potentially creating new hazards or masking underlying problems, which is a violation of operational integrity and could have legal ramifications. Finally, an approach that involves discussing the issue with colleagues without formally reporting it to supervisors or the appropriate safety personnel is also incorrect. This informal communication can lead to misinformation, delayed action, and a lack of accountability, undermining the structured safety management system Nucor relies upon. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and compliance. This involves 1. Identifying the potential risk or deviation from standard operating procedures. 2. Consulting relevant company policies and regulatory guidelines. 3. Reporting the observation through the designated channels immediately. 4. Cooperating with any subsequent investigation or corrective actions. This systematic approach ensures that all concerns are addressed appropriately, fostering a culture of safety and accountability. Question 9. Stakeholder feedback indicates a potential need to expedite the implementation of a new manufacturing process at Nucor to meet increased market demand. However, preliminary internal discussions suggest that a full environmental impact assessment and the associated permitting process might delay the launch by several months. What is the most appropriate course of action for Nucor's management to ensure both operational efficiency and regulatory compliance? Option A. Submit preliminary environmental data to regulatory agencies to secure an expedited conditional permit, with the understanding that a full assessment will follow at a later date. Option B. Prioritize meeting market demand by initiating the new process and only addressing environmental compliance and reporting requirements if specifically requested by regulatory bodies. Option C. Engage independent environmental consultants immediately to conduct a comprehensive environmental impact assessment and guide the permitting process, even if it means a slight adjustment to the initial launch timeline. Option D. Proceed with the new process at full production capacity while deferring the formal environmental impact assessment and permitting until after the initial demand surge has been met. The correct answer is C. Engage independent environmental consultants immediately to conduct a comprehensive environmental impact assessment and guide the permitting process, even if it means a slight adjustment to the initial launch timeline. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the company's operational needs with the stringent regulatory requirements governing environmental compliance and public disclosure. Nucor, as a publicly traded company, is subject to specific reporting obligations and must ensure its environmental practices align with federal and state laws. The pressure to maintain production levels can create a conflict with the time and resources needed for thorough environmental assessments and reporting, demanding careful judgment to avoid regulatory violations and reputational damage. The correct approach involves proactively engaging with environmental consultants to conduct a comprehensive assessment of the new process's potential impact and to ensure all reporting requirements are met accurately and on time. This aligns with the Environmental Protection Agency's (EPA) regulations, such as the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act, which mandate monitoring, reporting, and permitting for industrial emissions and discharges. Ethically, this demonstrates Nucor's commitment to responsible corporate citizenship and transparency with regulatory bodies and the public. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate production over thorough environmental assessment risks significant regulatory penalties, including fines and operational shutdowns, under EPA enforcement actions. It also violates ethical obligations to operate in an environmentally sound manner and could lead to public backlash and damage to Nucor's brand reputation. Another incorrect approach, which involves submitting incomplete or preliminary data to regulatory agencies, is a direct violation of reporting requirements and can be construed as an attempt to mislead or circumvent regulatory oversight. This can result in severe legal consequences and loss of trust with regulators. Finally, an approach that delays reporting until significant issues are identified is also professionally unsound. Regulatory frameworks often require timely reporting of environmental incidents or deviations from permitted levels. Such delays can exacerbate environmental damage and lead to more severe penalties. Professionals at Nucor should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and environmental stewardship. This involves 1. Identifying all applicable environmental regulations and reporting deadlines. 2. Allocating sufficient resources for environmental assessments and compliance activities. 3. Establishing clear communication channels with environmental consultants and regulatory agencies. 4. Implementing robust internal controls and review processes for all environmental reporting. 5. Fostering a culture where environmental responsibility is integrated into operational decision-making, even when it presents short-term challenges to production targets. Question 10. Regulatory review indicates that Nucor's manufacturing facilities may need to adjust their emissions control systems to comply with a newly published federal standard for particulate matter. Nucor's environmental compliance team has reviewed the standard and has differing interpretations of its specific requirements for certain types of industrial processes. Which of the following actions represents the most appropriate and compliant approach for Nucor to take? Option A. Proceed with operational adjustments based on the most conservative internal interpretation of the new standard to ensure compliance. Option B. Wait for the EPA to issue specific guidance or initiate an enforcement action before making any significant operational changes. Option C. Implement changes that are the least costly to achieve while still appearing to meet the basic requirements of the new standard. Option D. Proactively contact the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, to seek clarification on the specific interpretation of the new standard for Nucor's processes. The correct answer is A. Proceed with operational adjustments based on the most conservative internal interpretation of the new standard to ensure compliance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential conflict between a company's operational needs and the stringent regulatory requirements governing environmental compliance. Nucor, as a major industrial entity, must navigate these regulations meticulously to avoid legal repercussions, reputational damage, and operational disruptions. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting and applying complex environmental regulations to a specific operational context, ensuring that all actions taken are not only efficient, but also fully compliant. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with the imperative of environmental stewardship as mandated by law. The correct approach involves proactively seeking clarification from the relevant regulatory body regarding the interpretation of the new emissions standard. This demonstrates a commitment to compliance and a responsible approach to environmental management. By engaging directly with the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, or its equivalent under U.S. federal law, Nucor ensures that its understanding of the regulation is accurate and that its proposed operational adjustments will meet the required standards. This proactive step mitigates the risk of non-compliance and allows for informed decision-making, aligning operational changes with legal obligations. This aligns with the overarching principle of regulatory adherence and due diligence expected of all regulated entities. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with operational changes based on an internal interpretation of the new emissions standard, without seeking external validation. This carries a significant risk of misinterpreting the regulation, leading to potential violations. Such an action would demonstrate a lack of due diligence and could be viewed as a willful disregard for regulatory requirements, exposing Nucor to penalties. Another incorrect approach would be to delay implementation of any changes until a formal enforcement action is initiated by the regulatory agency. This reactive stance is highly problematic. It signifies a failure to proactively manage compliance risks and suggests a willingness to operate in a potentially non-compliant manner until compelled to change. This approach is not only legally precarious, but also ethically questionable, as it prioritizes avoiding immediate scrutiny over ensuring ongoing adherence to environmental laws. A further incorrect approach would be to implement changes that are minimally compliant, focusing solely on meeting the letter of the law, without considering the spirit or intent of the regulation. While technically compliant, this approach can lead to future issues if the regulatory interpretation evolves, or if the operational changes create unforeseen environmental impacts. It lacks the forward thinking and comprehensive risk management that robust regulatory compliance demands. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, thoroughly understand the applicable regulations. Second, assess the potential impact of the regulation on current operations. Third, if ambiguity exists, proactively seek clarification from the relevant regulatory authority. Fourth, implement changes based on confirmed understanding and document all steps taken. Finally, establish ongoing monitoring and review processes to ensure continued compliance. Question 11. Consider a scenario where Nucor is implementing a new employee onboarding process that involves collecting sensitive personal information from new hires. A junior HR representative identifies a potential discrepancy between the data collection methods outlined in the new process and the specific guidelines provided within the Nucor hiring assessment tests regulatory framework regarding data privacy and consent. The representative is unsure how to proceed, as the new process has already been approved internally by management, who are focused on efficiency. What is the most appropriate course of action for the junior HR representative to ensure compliance with the Nucor hiring assessment test's regulatory framework? Option A. Proceed with the new onboarding process as planned, assuming that internal management approval supersedes any potential conflicts with the Nucor hiring assessment test's guidelines. Option B. Immediately halt the implementation of the new onboarding process and escalate the concern to the legal department and the relevant regulatory body for clarification. Option C. Inform management of the potential discrepancy and suggest proceeding with the new process, while a review of the Nucor hiring assessment test's guidelines is conducted at a later date. Option D. Discreetly modify the data collection methods in the new process to align with the representative's interpretation of the Nucor hiring assessment test's guidelines without informing management or seeking external clarification. The correct answer is B. Immediately halt the implementation of the new onboarding process and escalate the concern to the legal department and the relevant regulatory body for clarification. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing competing stakeholder interests while adhering to the specific regulatory framework governing Nucor's operations. The core difficulty lies in interpreting and applying these regulations to a novel situation, ensuring that Nucor's actions are not only legally compliant, but also ethically sound and aligned with its corporate responsibilities. Careful judgment is essential to avoid potential legal repercussions, reputational damage, and erosion of trust among stakeholders. The correct approach involves proactively seeking clarification from the relevant regulatory bodies and engaging in open communication with affected stakeholders. This demonstrates a commitment to transparency and due diligence. Specifically, by consulting the Nucor hiring assessment tests governing regulations and guidelines, the company ensures its actions are aligned with the established legal and ethical standards. This proactive stance minimizes ambiguity and reduces the risk of non-compliance. It also fosters trust by showing stakeholders that Nucor values their input and is committed to operating within the prescribed framework. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost savings without regulatory consultation would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the specific regulatory framework, potentially leading to violations that could result in fines, legal action, and damage to Nucor's reputation. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on internal company policy without considering external regulatory mandates, also represents a significant ethical and legal failure. Company policies, while important, cannot supersede governing laws and regulations. Finally, an approach that delays addressing the issue, hoping it will resolve itself, is a dereliction of professional duty and a failure to uphold regulatory obligations, potentially exacerbating any negative consequences. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core issue and its potential impact on all stakeholders. This is followed by a thorough review of the applicable regulatory framework, seeking expert advice if necessary. Open and transparent communication with stakeholders should be initiated early in the process. The chosen course of action must be justifiable under the relevant laws and ethical principles, with a clear understanding of the potential risks and benefits. Documentation of the decision-making process is also crucial for accountability and future reference. Question 12. The risk matrix shows a potential control deficiency in Nucor's accounts payable process that could lead to duplicate payments. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and compliant response to this identified risk? Option A. Classify the risk as low impact and monitor it periodically without immediate corrective action, assuming the likelihood of duplicate payments is minimal. Option B. Implement a superficial procedural change, such as increasing manual checks without fully investigating the underlying systemic issue. Option C. Conduct a detailed review of the identified control deficiency to understand its root cause, develop a documented remediation plan to address the cause, implement the plan, and test its effectiveness. Option D. Postpone any remediation efforts until the next annual internal audit cycle, citing current operational demands. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed review of the identified control deficiency to understand its root cause, develop a documented remediation plan to address the cause, implement the plan, and test its effectiveness. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Nucor, as a publicly traded company, is subject to stringent regulatory oversight regarding its financial reporting and internal controls. The risk matrix, a common tool for assessing potential threats, highlights a critical area where a breakdown in controls could lead to significant financial misstatements, reputational damage, and legal repercussions. The challenge lies in determining the most appropriate and compliant response to an identified control deficiency, balancing the need for timely remediation with adherence to established accounting principles and regulatory mandates. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed solution is not only effective, but also legally sound and ethically defensible. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented assessment of the identified control deficiency and the development of a remediation plan that addresses the root cause. This plan must be implemented and tested to ensure its effectiveness. This aligns with the principles of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act (SOX) in the United States, which mandates that public companies establish and maintain internal controls over financial reporting. Specifically, Section 404 requires management to assess and report on the effectiveness of these controls, and Section 302 requires the CEO and CFO to certify the accuracy of financial statements and the effectiveness of disclosure controls and procedures. A proactive, documented, and tested remediation strategy is essential for SOX compliance and for maintaining investor confidence. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the deficiency as minor without proper evaluation. This fails to acknowledge the potential for even small control weaknesses to be exploited or to escalate into more significant issues. Ethically, this demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the company's responsibility to maintain robust internal controls. From a regulatory standpoint, it directly contravenes the spirit and letter of SOX, which requires a comprehensive approach to control assessment and remediation. Another incorrect approach would be to implement a quick fix without understanding the underlying cause of the deficiency. This superficial solution may temporarily mask the problem, but does not prevent its recurrence. This approach is problematic because it does not achieve sustainable control effectiveness, leaving Nucor vulnerable to future issues. It also fails to meet the SOX requirement for effective internal controls, as the remediation must address the root cause to be considered truly effective. A third incorrect approach would be to delay remediation indefinitely, citing resource constraints or other operational priorities. This passive stance is unacceptable under SOX. Regulatory bodies expect timely action to address identified control weaknesses. Prolonged inaction increases the risk of material misstatements and can lead to significant penalties and sanctions. It also signals a lack of commitment to financial integrity and compliance. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, Thoroughly understand and document the identified control deficiency, including its potential impact. Second, assess the root cause of the deficiency. Third, develop a remediation plan that directly addresses the root cause and is designed to be sustainable. Fourth, implement the remediation plan and rigorously test its effectiveness. Finally, document all steps taken and maintain ongoing monitoring to ensure continued control effectiveness. This systematic process ensures compliance with regulatory requirements and upholds ethical standards. Question 13. The investigation demonstrates that a Nucor manager, during a casual conversation, asks a subordinate for specific pricing details of a recently secured contract with a key supplier, stating it would be helpful for internal benchmarking. The subordinate is aware that this information is considered sensitive and not typically shared outside of specific procurement and finance departments without explicit authorization. Option A. Provide the specific pricing details to the manager, as direct requests from a supervisor are generally expected to be fulfilled. Option B. Politely decline to provide the specific pricing details, explaining that such information is considered confidential and requires a formal request through established channels. Option C. Offer to provide an approximate range of pricing, as this is less specific and therefore less likely to cause issues. Option D. Immediately report the manager to Nucor's compliance department, without speaking to the manager first. The correct answer is A. Provide the specific pricing details to the manager, as direct requests from a supervisor are generally expected to be fulfilled. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate a situation where a direct supervisor is requesting information that may be confidential or sensitive, potentially impacting Nucor's competitive standing or internal operations. The employee must balance their duty to their supervisor with their ethical obligations and adherence to company policy, which is implicitly governed by the principles of fair competition and data integrity, expected within the U.S. regulatory framework for publicly traded companies. Careful judgment is required to avoid both insubordination and the disclosure of privileged information. The correct approach involves politely but firmly declining to provide the specific, potentially sensitive competitive data, citing company policy or the need for a more formal request process. This upholds professional integrity by respecting confidentiality and adhering to established procedures. It aligns with the ethical principles of fair business practices and the implicit regulatory expectation that companies like Nucor will not engage in or facilitate the improper acquisition of competitor information. This approach protects Nucor from potential legal or reputational damage that could arise from unauthorized disclosure. Providing the requested information without proper authorization or a clear business justification represents a significant ethical and potential regulatory failure. It could be construed as a breach of confidentiality, potentially violating internal Nucor policies designed to protect proprietary information and trade secrets. Furthermore, depending on the nature of the information, it could expose Nucor to accusations of unfair competitive practices, which are scrutinized under U.S. antitrust and trade regulations. Another incorrect approach is to immediately escalate the matter to a higher authority without first attempting to clarify the supervisor's intent or the nature of the information requested. While escalation is sometimes necessary, a premature jump can undermine the supervisor-employee relationship and may not be the most efficient way to resolve the situation. It also fails to demonstrate independent professional judgment in assessing the request's appropriateness. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve 1. Understanding the request. Clarify what specific information is being sought and the purpose. 2. Assessing the nature of the information. Determine if it is proprietary, confidential, or sensitive. 3. Consulting internal policies. Review Nucor's guidelines on information sharing and confidentiality. 4. Communicating professionally. If the information is sensitive, politely decline or seek clarification on the appropriate channel for such requests, referencing policy. 5. Escalating appropriately. If concerns persist or the supervisor insists on inappropriate disclosure, follow Nucor's established channels for reporting ethical concerns or seeking guidance from HR or legal departments. Question 14. The analysis reveals that a Nucor employee who is involved in a significant procurement decision discovers that a close family member is a principal in one of the bidding companies. The employee has not previously disclosed this familial relationship to Nucor, Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action for the Nucor employee, adhering strictly to U.S. regulatory frameworks and best corporate governance practices? Option A. Proceed with the procurement decision as planned, assuming their professional judgment will not be compromised by the personal relationship. Option B. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to Nucor's compliance department and recuse themselves from any further involvement in the procurement decision-making process. Option C. Discreetly inquire with the family member about their company's bid to gauge its competitiveness without revealing their own involvement in the decision. Option D. Continue with the decision-making process, but make a note in their personal files about the relationship for future reference. The correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to Nucor's compliance department and recuse themselves from any further involvement in the procurement decision-making process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure compliance with Nucor's internal policies and relevant U.S. securities regulations. The core of the challenge lies in maintaining objectivity and avoiding any perception of impropriety when a close personal relationship might influence business decisions or the dissemination of sensitive information. Careful judgment is required to uphold ethical standards and regulatory obligations. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and adherence to Nucor's established conflict of interest policy and relevant U.S. securities laws, such as those governed by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. This approach is best professional practice because it proactively addresses potential ethical breaches and regulatory violations. By disclosing the relationship and recusing oneself from decisions where a conflict might arise, the individual demonstrates integrity and commitment to fair dealing. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the fiduciary duties owed to the company and its shareholders, ensuring that decisions are made in Nucor's best interest, free from personal bias. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the decision-making process without disclosing the relationship. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure because it violates Nucor's conflict of interest policy, which mandates disclosure of such relationships. Furthermore, it creates a substantial risk of violating SEC regulations concerning insider trading and fair disclosure, as personal relationships can inadvertently lead to the misuse or selective disclosure of material non-public information. Another incorrect approach would be to downplay the significance of the relationship and assume it will not influence judgment. This is ethically unsound as it relies on self-deception and ignores the inherent potential for bias. It also fails to meet the objective standards of compliance required by both internal policies and external regulations, which are designed to prevent even the appearance of impropriety. A third incorrect approach would be to seek advice from the involved family member on how to proceed. This is a critical ethical and regulatory misstep, as it directly involves the conflicted party in the decision-making process and further compounds the conflict of interest. It undermines the principle of independent judgment and increases the likelihood of regulatory noncompliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of Nucor's code of conduct and conflict of interest policies, as well as a working knowledge of applicable U.S. securities laws. When a potential conflict arises, the first step is always to identify and acknowledge it. Subsequently, the individual should consult relevant company policies and, if necessary, seek guidance from the compliance department or legal counsel. Transparency and proactive disclosure are paramount. If a conflict cannot be effectively managed through disclosure and recusal, the individual should step away from the decision entirely. Question 15. Process analysis reveals that Nucor is experiencing an unexpected surge in demand for a specific steel product, potentially impacting its quarterly earnings significantly. Before the official earnings release, internal projections based on preliminary data suggest a substantial upside. What is the most appropriate course of action for Nucor's management to ensure compliance with U.S. securities regulations and maintain stakeholder trust? Option A. Withhold all information regarding the demand surge until the next scheduled earnings call, even if the impact is material and verifiable. Option B. Conduct a thorough internal review and verification of the demand surge's impact on all financial metrics, consulting with legal and compliance teams before making any public statement. Option C. Immediately issue a press release detailing the preliminary earnings projections based on the demand surge to inform investors of the potential positive impact. Option D. Share the preliminary earnings projections with a select group of long-term institutional investors to provide them with an early advantage. The correct answer is C. Immediately issue a press release detailing the preliminary earnings projections based on the demand surge to inform investors of the potential positive impact. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Nucor, as a publicly traded company, operates under strict regulatory oversight, particularly concerning financial reporting and stakeholder communication. The challenge lies in balancing the need for timely information dissemination with the imperative of accuracy and compliance, especially when dealing with potentially sensitive internal data. Misrepresenting or prematurely releasing unverified information can lead to significant legal and reputational damage, impacting investor confidence and potentially violating securities laws. The correct approach involves a thorough internal review and verification process before any public statement is made. This aligns with the principles of accurate and transparent financial disclosure, as mandated by regulatory bodies like the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, in the United States. By ensuring all information is vetted and confirmed, Nucor upholds its legal and ethical obligations to provide truthful and material information to the market. This approach prioritizes regulatory compliance and stakeholder trust over speed. An incorrect approach would be to immediately release preliminary, unverified data to the public. This action would violate the principle of accurate disclosure, as the information could be misleading or incomplete. Such a premature release could be construed as market manipulation or a violation of SEC rules requiring the disclosure of material non-public information in a fair and balanced manner. Another incorrect approach would be to withhold all information indefinitely, even after verification, due to internal uncertainty. While caution is necessary, prolonged silence on material developments can also be problematic, potentially leading to accusations of withholding crucial information or creating an information vacuum that allows speculation and misinformation to flourish. This can erode investor confidence and may also have regulatory implications if it's perceived as an attempt to manipulate market perception. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to selectively release information to favored stakeholders before a general public announcement. This constitutes selective disclosure, a serious violation of fair disclosure regulations. All stakeholders should receive material information simultaneously to ensure a level playing field in the market. The professional decision-making process for Nucor in such situations should involve a clear protocol for information verification and release. This protocol should define roles and responsibilities, establish timelines for review, and outline communication channels. When faced with a situation requiring public disclosure, professionals should consult with legal and compliance departments to ensure all actions adhere to the relevant regulatory framework, prioritizing accuracy, completeness, and fairness in all communications. Question 16. To address the challenge of onboarding a new potential supplier for critical raw materials, a Nucor procurement specialist is evaluating proposals. One supplier offers the most competitive pricing and shortest delivery schedule, but their operational location is in a region with known regulatory challenges regarding labor practices and environmental standards. What is the most professionally responsible approach for the Nucor specialist to take in assessing this supplier? Option A. Conduct thorough due diligence on the supplier's compliance with all applicable U.S. federal and state laws, as well as international labor and environmental standards, and verify their claims through independent means before making a recommendation. Option B. Accept the supplier's proposal based on a strong internal recommendation from a long-standing Nucor employee who has had positive interactions with the supplier in the past. Option C. Proceed with the supplier's proposal, but include a clause in the contract that vaguely addresses ethical sourcing without specific verification requirements. Option D. Prioritize the supplier's proposal based on the lowest bid and fastest delivery time, assuming their self-reported compliance information is accurate. Correct answer is A. Conduct thorough due diligence on the supplier's compliance with all applicable U.S. federal and state laws, as well as international labor and environmental standards, and verify their claims through independent means before making a recommendation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Nucor employee tasked with assessing potential risks associated with a new supplier. The challenge lies in balancing the need for efficient procurement with the imperative to uphold Nucor's commitment to ethical sourcing and regulatory compliance. A superficial risk assessment could lead to significant financial, reputational, and legal repercussions for Nucor, especially if the supplier engages in practices that violate environmental, labor, or anti-corruption laws. Careful judgment is required to identify and mitigate these risks proactively. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive due diligence process that extends beyond immediate cost and delivery timelines. This includes thoroughly investigating the potential supplier's operational history, labor practices, environmental compliance record, and any past or ongoing legal disputes. It also necessitates understanding the regulatory landscape in the supplier's operating jurisdiction and verifying their adherence to those laws. This proactive and thorough risk assessment aligns with Nucor's ethical standards and regulatory obligations, ensuring that the company does not inadvertently partner with entities that engage in unethical or illegal activities. Such an approach minimizes the likelihood of future disruptions, legal challenges, and damage to Nucor's reputation. Incorrect approach is analysis, focusing solely on the lowest bid and shortest lead time without investigating the supplier's background, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach prioritizes short-term cost savings over long-term risk management and compliance. It could lead to Nucor unknowingly engaging with a supplier involved in forced labor, environmental pollution, or bribery, thereby violating various U.S. federal and state laws, e.g. the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, environmental regulations, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and Nucor's own code of conduct. Accepting the supplier's self-reported compliance information at face value without independent verification is also professionally unacceptable. While a supplier may claim to be compliant, this claim needs to be substantiated through audits, third-party certifications, or reference checks. Relying solely on self-reporting bypasses critical verification steps and leaves Nucor vulnerable to misrepresentations, which could result in noncompliance with contractual obligations and legal statutes. Relying on the recommendation of a single internal contact without broader due diligence is another flawed approach. While internal recommendations can be valuable, they should not substitute for a systematic risk assessment. This approach risks overlooking systemic issues or conflicts of interest that the recommending individual may not be aware of or may be intentionally obscuring. It fails to provide the objective, comprehensive evaluation necessary to protect Nucor's interests and ensure regulatory adherence. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Nucor should adopt a risk-based approach to supplier selection. This involves 1. Identifying potential risks. What are the potential legal, ethical, operational, and reputational risks associated with this supplier and their operating environment? 2. Assessing the likelihood and impact of these risks. How probable are these risks, and what would be the consequences if they materialized? 3. Developing mitigation strategies. What steps can be taken to reduce the likelihood or impact of identified risks? 4. Implementing and monitoring controls. Putting in place mechanisms to ensure ongoing compliance and to detect any emerging risks. This structured process ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with both Nucor's business objectives and its legal and ethical responsibilities. Question 17. The review process indicates that a Nucor employee, while attending an industry conference, engaged in a conversation with an employee from a direct competitor. During this conversation, the competitor's employee inadvertently revealed details about an upcoming product launch that Nucor had not yet publicly announced. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Nucor employee? Option A. Politely disengage from the conversation and make a note of the information for internal review by Nucor's legal and competitive intelligence teams. Option B. Immediately report the competitor's employee to the relevant industry regulatory body for attempting to share proprietary information. Option C. Continue the conversation to gather more details about the competitor's product launch, as this information could provide a significant competitive advantage. Option D. Ignore the information shared by the competitor's employee, as it was unsolicited and the employee did not actively seek it. The correct answer is A. Politely disengage from the conversation and make a note of the information for internal review by Nucor's legal and competitive intelligence teams. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's operational needs with the ethical imperative to protect sensitive information and ensure fair competition. Nucor, as a publicly traded company, has a responsibility to its shareholders to maintain a competitive edge, but this must be achieved through legitimate means. The challenge lies in discerning when information gathering crosses the line from standard competitive analysis into potentially unethical or illegal territory. Careful judgment is required to avoid actions that could lead to legal repercussions, reputational damage, or a loss of trust with stakeholders. The correct approach involves a proactive and ethical stance on competitive intelligence gathering. This means focusing on publicly available information and industry trends, rather than seeking to obtain proprietary or confidential data through questionable means. This approach aligns with the principles of fair competition and ethical business conduct, which are implicitly expected of all employees and are often reinforced by company policies and industry best practices. Specifically, adhering to the spirit of regulations that prohibit insider trading and unfair competitive practices is paramount. By limiting information gathering to legitimate sources, Nucor safeguards itself from accusations of corporate espionage or other unethical behavior, thereby protecting its reputation and long-term viability. An incorrect approach that involves attempting to solicit non-public information from a competitor's employee, even if framed as a casual conversation, represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This action could be construed as an attempt to gain an unfair competitive advantage through illicit means, potentially violating laws related to trade secrets and unfair competition. Such behavior undermines the integrity of the market and can lead to severe legal penalties for both the individual and the company. Another incorrect approach, which is to disregard the information obtained from the competitor's employee because it was unsolicited, is also professionally unsound. While the information may have been unsolicited, the act of seeking or accepting it, even passively, can still create ethical dilemmas and potential legal exposure. The professional responsibility is to avoid even the appearance of impropriety and to ensure that all competitive intelligence is gathered through ethical and legal channels. Ignoring the situation does not absolve the individual or the company of potential wrongdoing. A third incorrect approach, which is to immediately report the competitor's employee to regulatory authorities without internal review, may be premature and could escalate the situation unnecessarily. While reporting potential violations is important, the initial step should involve an internal assessment to understand the context and nature of the information shared. This allows Nucor to gather facts and determine the appropriate course of action, which might include internal disciplinary measures or a more measured approach to external reporting, ensuring that actions are proportionate and well-founded. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of Nucor's code of conduct and relevant legal frameworks governing competitive practices. When faced with potentially sensitive information, professionals should pause, assess the source and nature of the information, and consider whether its acquisition or use would violate ethical principles or legal statutes. If there is any doubt, seeking guidance from Nucor's legal or compliance department is the most prudent course of action. This ensures that decisions are made with full awareness of the potential risks and in alignment with the company's commitment to ethical operations. Question 18. What factors determine the appropriate course of action for a Nucor employee when a close personal friend applies for a position within the company where the employee has hiring influence? Option A. The employee's desire to help their friend advance their career. Option B. The employee's personal assessment of their ability to remain objective and the friend's qualifications. Option C. The existence of a personal relationship and the employee's potential influence over the hiring decision, necessitating disclosure and recusal. Option D. The perceived likelihood of the friend being the best candidate for the role. The correct answer is B. The employee's personal assessment of their ability to remain objective and the friend's qualifications. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual at Nucor to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure adherence to ethical standards and regulatory compliance. Specifically within the context of the Nucor hiring assessment test's implied regulatory framework, which we will assume aligns with general U.S. corporate and employment law principles for this exercise. The core challenge lies in balancing personal relationships with professional obligations and maintaining the integrity of the hiring process. Careful judgment is required to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. The correct approach involves a transparent and objective process that prioritizes fairness and compliance. This means disclosing the relationship and recusing oneself from any decision-making that could be influenced by the personal connection. This aligns with fundamental principles of corporate governance and employment law, which mandate fair hiring practices and prohibit discrimination or favoritism. Specifically, it upholds the spirit of regulations designed to ensure a level playing field for all applicants and prevent undue influence on hiring decisions. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the interview and evaluation without disclosure or recusal would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a direct violation of ethical obligations to maintain impartiality and avoid conflicts of interest. It also risks violating employment laws that prohibit discriminatory hiring practices, as the personal relationship could subconsciously or consciously influence the evaluation, leading to an unfair outcome for other candidates. Another incorrect approach, such as attempting to subtly steer the interview or provide insider information to the candidate, represents a severe ethical breach and potential legal violation. This is not only a conflict of interest, but also constitutes a form of deception that undermines the integrity of the hiring process and Nucor's commitment to fair employment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear framework. 1. Identify the potential conflict of interest. Recognize any personal relationship that could influence professional judgment. 2. Consult relevant policies and regulations. Review Nucor's internal policies on conflicts of interest in hiring, as well as applicable employment laws. 3. Disclose the relationship. Immediately inform the appropriate supervisor or HR department about the personal connection. 4. Recuse from decision-making. Step away from any part of the hiring process that involves the candidate, including interviewing, evaluating, or making a hiring recommendation. 5. Maintain confidentiality. Ensure that the personal relationship does not lead to the disclosure of confidential hiring information. Question 19. The monitoring system demonstrates a pattern of minor deviations in material handling procedures at a Nucor facility that, while not immediately causing a safety incident, could potentially fall outside of specific environmental reporting thresholds. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the Nucor supervisor overseeing this area? Option A. Immediately halt all material handling operations in the affected area until a full review can be completed by external auditors. Option B. Instruct the team to adjust their procedures to avoid triggering the monitoring system alerts without further investigation into the underlying cause of the deviations. Option C. Log the alerts as minor operational noise and continue with current procedures, assuming the deviations are within acceptable unstated tolerances. Option D. Initiate a detailed, documented investigation into the nature and frequency of the deviations, cross-referencing with relevant environmental regulations and Nucor's internal compliance protocols, and consult with the facility's environmental compliance officer. The correct answer is D. Initiate a detailed, documented investigation into the nature and frequency of the deviations, cross-referencing with relevant environmental regulations and Nucor's internal compliance protocols, and consult with the facility's environmental compliance officer. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires Nucor employees to balance the need for operational efficiency with strict adherence to regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. The monitoring system has flagged a potential deviation, and the immediate response must be informed by the specific regulatory framework governing Nucor's operations within its jurisdiction. Misinterpreting or ignoring these flags can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and a breakdown of internal controls. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate course of action without causing undue disruption or compromising safety and compliance. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented investigation of the flagged activity, adhering strictly to Nucor's internal policies and the relevant regulatory guidelines. This means gathering all pertinent information, consulting with designated compliance officers or legal counsel if necessary, and taking corrective action only after a clear understanding of the situation and its regulatory implications. This approach ensures that Nucor remains compliant with its legal obligations, upholds its ethical standards, and maintains the integrity of its operations. The justification lies in the principle of proactive compliance and due diligence, which are fundamental to regulatory frameworks designed to prevent harm and ensure fair practice. An incorrect approach of immediately halting all related operations without proper investigation is professionally unacceptable because it can lead to unnecessary business disruption, financial losses, and potential damage to Nucor's reputation if the flagged activity is ultimately found to be compliant. This bypasses the established procedures for addressing potential noncompliance and demonstrates a lack of trust in the investigative process. Another incorrect approach of ignoring the flag and hoping it resolves itself is a severe ethical and regulatory failure. This demonstrates negligence and a disregard for the company's compliance obligations, potentially exposing Nucor to significant penalties and legal liabilities. It undermines the purpose of the monitoring system and creates an environment where noncompliance can go unchecked. A third incorrect approach of making a quick, undocumented decision based on assumptions rather than evidence is also professionally unsound. This lacks the rigor required for regulatory compliance, fails to create an audit trail, and can lead to inconsistent or incorrect corrective actions, thereby increasing the risk of future violations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the regulatory context, meticulously gathering facts, consulting relevant internal and external experts, and documenting every step of the process. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are not only efficient but also legally sound and ethically defensible, safeguarding both the individual and the organization. Question 20. Strategic planning requires Nucor's finance department to assess the current quarter's performance, while anticipating a significant new contract to be finalized early in the next quarter that will substantially improve profitability. The current quarter's results are projected to be below expectations. The finance manager is considering whether to adjust the current quarter's financial reporting to reflect the anticipated positive impact of the future contract to present a more favorable picture to stakeholders. Option A. Consult with external auditors and legal counsel to determine the most appropriate accounting treatment and disclosure for the situation. Option B. Accurately report the current quarter's financial results based on transactions and events that have occurred up to the reporting date, and disclose the anticipated future contract in the management discussion and analysis section. Option C. Recognize a portion of the anticipated revenue from the future contract in the current quarter, assuming its finalization is highly probable. Option D. Defer certain operating expenses that are expected to be incurred in the next quarter to reduce the current quarter's reported expenses. Correct answer is B. Accurately report the current quarter's financial results based on transactions and events that have occurred up to the reporting date, and disclose the anticipated future contract in the management discussion and analysis section. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Nucor, as a publicly traded company, operates under strict regulatory oversight, particularly concerning financial reporting and corporate governance. The decision-maker must balance the immediate pressure for positive financial results with the long-term integrity of the company's financial statements and its legal obligations. Misrepresenting financial performance, even with the intention of future correction, can lead to severe legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of investor confidence. The correct approach involves adhering to generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, and the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, regulations. This means accurately reflecting the company's financial position at the end of the reporting period, regardless of anticipated future improvements. This approach is ethically sound and legally compliant, ensuring transparency and accountability to shareholders and the market. It upholds the principle of prudence in financial reporting, where potential future gains are not recognized until realized, and potential future losses are recognized when probable and estimable. An incorrect approach that involves prematurely recognizing revenue or deferring expenses to artificially boost current period earnings is a direct violation of GAAP and SEC rules. This constitutes financial misstatement and can be considered accounting fraud. Such actions undermine the reliability of financial information, which is crucial for informed investment decisions. Another incorrect approach, such as making overly optimistic projections without a solid basis, can mislead investors and create unrealistic expectations, potentially leading to future stock price volatility and regulatory scrutiny. Failing to consult with legal and accounting experts before making such decisions is also a significant ethical and professional lapse, as it bypasses crucial checks and balances designed to ensure compliance and sound judgment. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying the core issue and potential consequences. 2. Consulting relevant regulations and internal policies. 3. Seeking advice from legal counsel and accounting professionals. 4. Evaluating all available options against ethical principles and legal requirements. 5. Choosing the option that ensures accurate and transparent reporting, even if it means presenting less favorable short-term results.